Releasing Trauma is sponsored by the Global Association for Trauma Recovery. The Global Association for Trauma Recovery is a social impact organization serving as a resource for survivors and their families, dedicated to facilitating change by spreading trauma-related awareness and thus creating a more trauma-informed world. Learn more at gaftr.org. Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or a survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I am your host, Tracy Osborne, and with me today is Laura Martin. We are going to be talking about the gut-brain connection, which is a very important topic, especially when you're coming out of trauma and your body is just a complete mess. So, Laura, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I apologize for my voice. I am still getting over a cold, and so my vocal cords are just toast. So I will strain and talk as loud as I can and try not to cough while we're talking. And so, Laura, let's start out. Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah. So it's been going on for ages, but I'll fast forward to the time when I was 24. I was in Asia. So I lost my mom unexpectedly at 22 years old. And at that age, you don't really know how to deal with it. At any age, you don't really know how to deal with it, but especially like you're a kid at that time, you know? And I found my way to Asia straight after and into really messy situations, because it doesn't matter where you go, even if you change countries, your past is going to follow you if you don't follow it or deal with it. And so I was 24, rock bottom moment in an abusive relationship, contemplating my life, not really knowing what to do next, and how to get out of it. But all I knew was I needed to get my butt off that floor and to do something. And when you're in that state, you have two choices, right? You either choose to rise, however messy and imperfect that is, or you stay where you're at. And generally that outcome isn't that well. And so I realized at that time, it's not that I wanted my life to end. I just didn't want it to continue on that route. And by all fates, I got off the floor, and the next day I sat with one of my friends, telling her what state I was in and how bad it had truly gotten. And she had suggested I go and study nutrition, because at the time I had a really bad eating disorder. I was 40 pounds underweight. I had hyperthyroidism, then hypothyroidism. I hadn't had a cycle in about, at that time, 3 years, but it took me about 5.5 to finally get it back. My IBS was horrendous. Like I was maybe going to the bathroom once a week and just constantly looking like I was pregnant. And she's like, well, you have a really disordered relationship with food. Why don't you go learn about it? And so I did, and I went back to school and started studying nutrition to become a health coach and health consultant. And from there, my love affair with the gut started, because I had so many gut issues, because I had an eating disorder since I was young. I was diagnosed with IBS when I was super young, but I didn't pay attention to it. And I've always had these health issues. So I went the route of gut health and got specialized in that, but still everything I found was elimination diets and all the kind of things. And when you struggle with an eating disorder, you know, at first I got swooped up in it for many years of just like, yeah, this is perfect. Like I'm the gut health queen because I cut out all these foods and I eliminated all these foods and I'm doing this perfectly, realizing I still felt like crap, because it was just another term for my eating disorder. And so I went on this path of really trying to figure out different ways. And what came about was when I sat down with my naturopath's office, and she was like, do you want to talk about how your depression and your trauma are actually being shown through your health issues right now. And I was like, not really. No, I don't want to talk about that yet. And so I went on to do a whole bunch of like cleanses and detoxes and avoiding things. And over time realized that my coping mechanism for my trauma was this disordered relationship with food. It was using these elimination diets and rule books and things like that, realizing I was just doing the same thing over and over again, getting the same result because I wasn't changing anything. I was just taking out more foods and undernourishing my body. And so I found my way into the GutBrain Connection and all the science behind that and how trauma is stored in our body and our vagal tone. And it started to click because my background is psychology. So it all started to click.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, like this is what that is. And as I started to reprogram nourishing my body with more of the right foods and also focusing on, trauma therapy and going to the right things and relieving my nervous system again and recalibrating my vagal tone, everything became normal again. I mean, I wouldn't say normal, but better. Like, I don't think you really come back. Yeah, normaler. I'm like trauma, like it's just like a funny thing that keeps coming. But over time, you learn to get better at managing it and things of that nature and learning more about yourself. And so it's from there, it's all started. And it's funny because I got super into gut health when I first started. And I was like, this is it. And then I was like, no, at the root of my gut health things and why I even started, it was trauma. Like I got all of this stuff. And so that's now where my brand and my life really is. It's IBS anxiety and trauma informed therapy and things of that nature to help people find relief.
Wow, that's amazing. And for listeners who don't know what IBS is, it's irritable bowel syndrome. And I have a daughter who suffers from that. She was diagnosed in her teens, and it sucks. Mm-hmm. It really does. Mm-hmm. Hers is, kind of the opposite of yours. You said you didn't go, like maybe once a week. She has the diarrhea side of it. And it's a mess. It's awful. She lives on Imodium, mm-hmm. And I think a lot of it stems from probably past traumas, I'm sure, but unhealthy diet and stress and all of that play a huge role in how you feel.
Exactly. And that's the thing. So like in my practice, I'll see women that struggle with anxiety. They have usually bloating and diarrhea. And then I had depression. So depression is when you have lower neurotransmitters in your brain, which is correlated to lower neurotransmitters in your gut. So you don't have that motility. So they're usually, and it's kind of like the same thing. Like depression is, you're holding on to things, you're living in the past. Mm-hmm. That's what's happening in your gut. Anxiety is you're thinking in the future, you're trying to rush, you're moving through things. So you're releasing things. And so in my brain, like that part makes sense, but also on a science level, like how the enteric nervous system and everything functions as well. It's like, oh yeah. Like once you learn it, you're like, oh, like the body is so fascinating.
It really is. I mean, the more that I learn about, the effects of trauma on the body, it's like, mm-hmm. Wow, that's amazing. How you can really heal yourself a lot by healing your traumas and healing your emotional well-being.
Well, that's it. And if you don't and this is where in my field, it's not so it's very masculine, medical, pathologically based. It's like, oh, it's IBS, it's food. It's like, no, like that, especially as women, we have a lot of emotions, which, and we go through things based on our cycle, based on our life. And especially nowadays, I don't know anyone that doesn't have trauma. And it's because we're ill-informed about the topic. We don't like to talk about it because we only think big T trauma. And we think that's the thing. And it's like, no, it's trauma isn't an event. It's how your body physically responds to something. Right. Where people are like, oh, it's war, it's rape, it's divorce. It's like, no, those are events. Trauma is how your body responds to it and what it holds on to and how the biochemicals in your body, if you have adrenaline and cortisol and all this stuff pumping through you because you're stuck in a fight or flight response, whether it's stress because you're looking at blue lights all day or, you unexpectedly lost your mom, there's different things that people go through. But if your body is stuck in this state of adrenaline and cortisol, other biochemicals can't be released, like oxytocin and serotonin and, norepinephrine and dopamine, the things that keep us calm, happy, and regulated. We can't, if one switch is on, the other one's turned off. That's just the way it works, which leads to organs not functioning properly. Like food and eliminating foods is not going to fix that. Like we have to work backwards into what is the behavioral patterns to get our bodies regulated so the rest of our system can get back into balance and start absorbing nutrients and absorbing life again.
Exactly. I think the elimination diet is good if you are looking for food allergies and food sensitivities. It works well for that, but not for, depression and anxiety and IBS and leaky gut and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, even with like food sensitivity, like it's also misunderstood because food sensitivities isn't the problem. It's why is the body not digesting it? And this is like in my work, like people that are like, oh, like I'm sensitive to dairy or gluten or carbs or things like that. It's like, no, it doesn't mean we eliminate those things. We figure out why our diversity in our microbiome stop producing that type of bacteria so that you could digest it. Because you should be able to absorb those foods in microdoses, even like dairy specifically, like Parmesan cheese has really good bacteria inside of it. Like we should be eating those kind of stuff, of course, well produced and all that kind of stuff. But we often get trapped in like, oh, I did this food sensitivity kit and all this kind of stuff, or like, this is what this is. And we love to find one reason for something. Like we need to belong to something. We need a reason. So it's easier to say like, oh no, like I'm like lactose intolerant, or oh no, I have histamines, or oh no, I have this. And it's like, no. That's just a symptom. Like your body is trying to tell you something is off. And the more we eliminate, the more we start to actually strip away these bacteria, which is why we continually get more sensitive to things and why our nervous system then can't regulate itself, which is like, when you're taking that away, you also start to experience other health issues. It's not just like, oh, I can't digest dairy and that's the end of it. It's usually other things are happening in your body too, like brain fog, fatigue, adrenals, things of that nature. And it's like, we gotta look at the whole picture. Like we gotta stop being like, oh, like take out these foods and whatever. Allergies, of course. Allergies is like someone with a peanut allergy and they need an EpiPen. Of course, don't eat that. Like that's a normal one. But like if it's a sensitivity, those things are to be fixed. And it's not to say like, go eat foods that upset you, but don't just do it as like a write-off. Go and be like, oh, but like, why can't I digest that? Yeah. And then we start to investigate it from there.
So let's talk a little bit more about the gut-brain connection. You have to heal the gut in order to heal the brain. You can't really, or can you do it the other way too? Can you heal the brain and that heals the gut?
Both. Yeah. So to break it down, our gut and our brain are in constant communication with each other. It's very common nowadays for people to hear like your gut's your second brain and like all this stuff going on. And it's true, but there's multiple reasons. Like they're in constant communication through this thing called the vagus nerve, which I touched on earlier, which is your longest cranial nerve. It goes from your gut to your brain to your gut, and it gives off these things called action potentials. So it tells all of your survival organs how to function. And at the same time, it also gives off these anti-inflammatory compounds so that your body can function optimally. If it's overstimulated by your brain because of anxiety, because of trauma, because of something going on, your vagal tone will shut down, which means the anti-inflammatory compounds will shut down, which means inflammation starts to go, which is where the health issues come. And alternatively, if our gut is overactive or undernourished or overstressed from like fasting or fast food or, things that we just have misunderstood for a very long time, that will also send off these alarm bells in our body to be like, something's not right. And so when it's all run through this thing called the enteric nervous system. So we don't have to tell any of this stuff to happen. It just does it on its own out of survival mode. And so if we're stuck in fight or flight because of trauma, because of anxiety, because of depression, our blood flow is going to go to our survival organs because that's what we need. We need our heart to beat. We need our lungs to breathe. We need our muscles to move, because back in the day that meant danger and we had to get the heck out of there. And nowadays it's really like, it's just, we don't know if it's like actual immediate danger or it's just innate danger. Like it's our boss yelling at us. It's something that happened 20 years ago that we still haven't processed yet. So our body's reacting in a way. Yeah. And so if we don't address the brain, we can't get the gut going well. And also if we can't get the gut going well, then we're going to have neuroinflammation, which is going to keep spiking up anxiety and depression. So you have to look at both. That's why you can't just go like, oh, go on an elimination diet and solve the problems. It's like, no, let's pay attention to nutrition routines, getting in functional foods, getting this whole thing optimized again with nutrient-rich food so we can get the brain to decompress, while also looking at what is your daily lifestyle habits. What are the this is the question I missed when I was going through this process. Like, no one asked like what happened to me. No one asked what my life was like at home. No one proceeded anything beyond like, oh, what are you eating every day? And so that's the narrative we have to start switching, where it's like, it's both. We got to look at nutrition, and we got to look at what have you been doing that led you here?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry just wrote a book.
What happened
to you? It
yes, I'm reading it. It's
book.
So good.
Oh my gosh. and it makes sense. We don't stop and ask what happened to you. We ask what's wrong with you. And that's the wrong question, because what's wrong with you are the symptoms of what happened to you, So yeah, we've got to ask the right questions. Now, you went through a whole bunch of, trial and error, and you came up with a method that put your symptoms into remission without having to follow restrictive diets and stuff like that, right?
Facts. Yes, I did.
Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So I have two programs, right? I have Gut Recharge, which is all about metabolic restoration. And then I have the Labyrinth, which is all about anxiety and stress relief and chronic, like all the kind of mental kind of stuff. So two split things, but they both go through the acronym F.R.E.E, F-R-E-E, F being foundations. We can't do, oftentimes, like what we do is we jump into something and we go, okay, cool. I'm going to be keto. I'm going to eliminate all these foods. I'm going to do this. And it's like, no, we have to look at what are the habits you have right now that led you here? Because any diet I put on top of that means when this is over in 30 days, 20 days, 60 days, you're going to jump straight back into that.
Yep.
If we don't talk about that, we don't understand where you got it, how you probably learned it prior to the age of 7, and it's compounded because if that's how our brain works and our subconscious beliefs and all these kind of things, because really what we're acting out of is 95% of us is based off of a cellular memory of who we've been up until this moment. We only make our decisions on 5% of our brain is critical thinking brain. So we have to really understand how our habits and our belief systems and how they came to be are impacting us right now before I start to change anything about what's going on. Like, we just have to understand you as a whole. And then from there, we start to reprogram. The cool thing about us is neuroplasticity. Our brain gets to change how it fires and wires, epigenetics based on our habits. All of our DNA, all of our cells have DNA, but based on our lifestyle habits, they get turned off and on. Like I said, I had hyper and hypothyroidism. I no longer have that. I had IBS. I no longer have that. I had fertility issues. I no longer have those. Because I chose to change my lifestyle, and that's how that works. And then our microbiome changes within 4 days. So based off of those habits, things start to change. So anytime someone tells you like, oh, it runs in your family or you're stuck with this for a lifetime, it's like, but science says otherwise. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. So we start to reprogram things. We start to really understand how this works. And then from there, we explore things, because that's the scary part, right? Like, first we got to reprogram, get ourselves regulated, understand what's the feeling before the behavior happens. And that's how we start to happen. But oftentimes people will start to explore different things before they're regulated. Like, they start doing mantras or they start doing yoga and they start doing things, all fine, all totally fine. But if you're doing them when you're already dysregulated, it's not going to change the way your body is receiving these things. So after we get regulated, we move into exploring, okay, so in certain environments, in certain events, how are you going to bring yourself back into regulation? What's the process of that? How do we safely do this? How do we add more foods in so it feels really good? Because this is a big fear for people. It's like, I want to add in food, but now I have PTSD from all the flare-ups I had. Like, I don't want to do that. And so how do we rewire that into our body and explore it safely? And really, for me, it's always understanding the science. Like, how do I gradually strengthen my microbiome so I can get these foods back in, which is the entire process of exploring, because we don't want to just and most people do, to be honest. It's like the first week when I'm like, yeah, you can go eat cheese. They're like, whoa. And they go ham and potatoes on it. And then they're like, I feel rubbish. I'm like, well, of course you do. That's like me telling the kid, don't touch the stove and you just put your hands straight on it. Of course, we got to work our way up, just like when we're in the gym, to build that muscle. And then we evolve our lifestyle so that it becomes a daily practice. We can't just read something. We can't just listen to a podcast. We can't just watch a YouTube video and think, great, I listened to it, it's integrated into my life. It's what are you actively doing every single day to change this into a behavior? And then your life is free. And that's how that works.
I like it. I like it. Now, you talk a little bit about, the definitely nutritious food and everything, nutrient-rich food. And a lot of people, I think they hear nutrient-rich food and they hear cha-ching, cha-ching, because it's for people struggling and they're on a tight budget and that kind of thing, it's more affordable to eat like crap. But when you eat like crap, you feel like crap.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like in the short run, it's going to cost more, but in the long run, it's going to save you more.
Exactly.
So do you have some tips for those listeners who, maybe are in that situation where they would love to eat better, but they just can't afford to?
Yeah. And I want to challenge that too, because this is where the confusion is when we think health, we think like the center aisle at like Whole Foods, like the things in the boxes and stuff.
Yeah.
There are so many resources. Like I'm talking about the outside ails.
Yep.
Get in the kitchen, like use real foods. And it really isn't that expensive. There's so many different markets you can get. Like I don't know if you live in America or not, but Aldi, like they have such good produce and it's affordable for everyone, or Walmart. Like they have different things and they have different markets. And I get there's food deserts and things like that. And that is what people are trying to change with the buses and stuff. But really, it genuinely is. I'm talking about, what did your grandparents eat? Get back to the root veggies, the things that are colorful. When we think healthy, we think of like salads and, smoothies and things like that. And those things are perfect, but they aren't very nutrient dense. We need things that like, it's the perfect season right now for like fall. We need like stews and hearty meals and things like that. Like those things are so good for you. Just get back into that, adding in, just like carbs, fats, protein. Like how do we get that back in whatever budget you're at? You don't have to eat organic if that's not in your radar right now. Like let that go. But if it's between eating organic or eating some ramen, it's like, just don't do organic and go get good quality real food. And it's kind of just reframing what we think of as health and doing the best we can with the tools that we're given. If you have to eat ramen 6 days out of the 7, and the one day you get a healthy day, perfect. That's all you got to do until we move to the next step and we find something that's more comfortable, until we do the next step and that's more comfortable. You got to meet yourself where you're at. If we jump in thinking, oh, like this is going to strain me and stress me out and, I'm not going to be able to do this other thing. It's like, no, please don't do that. I never want people to worry, but also your health is the one thing we need for everything. You can't work, you can't take care of your family, you can't do the things we're meant to be doing and live a full, vivacious life if your health is to crap. So it's where you got to be able to take radical responsibility, not that you're at fault for your health being the way it is, but you are responsible for the story and how it's led to this moment. So where in your life can you start to pivot to realize this is a priority? And from there, you start to make shifts. But really, it is just working backwards. If it's just one day you're cooking, start there.
Yeah. Yeah, those are some great tips. Go on Pinterest, and I mean there are so many recipes.
Exactly. The internet's full of it.
Oh my gosh. They're good, they're cheap, they're wholesome, they're healthy. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be tough. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already out there for you. You just got to go do some research. So
exactly.
Pinterest is like my favorite tool.
Oh my God, I love it. And one last tip. Also, if you go to the farmer's market, if you have one by you and you go like right before it closes, they'll usually give you a mega discount on it.
Absolutely.
They're going to throw it away.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's a good tip too. Well, thank you, Laura. How can our listeners find you online?
Yeah, I am most active on Instagram. My personal one it's Laura Patricia Martin. So ITS, Laura Patricia Martin. And then our company one is Healing to Happy.
Awesome.
And from there, you'll see all the master classes and stuff that we got going on, but that's the easiest way to get started.
Great. Fantastic. And, listeners, I'm going to have all that stuff in the show notes. Just head over to releasingtraumapodcast.com and pull up Laura's episode, and all her contact information will be there for you. Laura, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me today. This is a topic I could talk about forever. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. And listeners, as always, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you in the next show.